Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Back at you with another newspaper read. I know it's been a while since I did one of these, and the mosquitoes are all over me. But let's read about the neocons, because I found a nice article here that will shed some light on American foreign policy and on the differences of opinions that exist on the American right wing. And we've been seeing those differences of opinion pan out with the whole Israel-Iran situation. There have been Americans like Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, who have been very isolationist, anti-war, anti-regime change. But then you have conservatives who are super pro-war, super pro-regime change, like Ted Cruz. This is the difference that this cuts to the difference of Paleocons and Neocons. The Neocons, who have always have had the degree of power over the Paleocons. You had presidents like Bush, who was probably the neocon to end all neocons, and his guy Dick Cheney, his whole administration. You had Reagan, and these people believed in American intervention. They're not unique in that. Neo-libs also believe in this. American intervention in the world to maintain the American empire. Because they see that America is an empire and it needs to maintain its hegemony over the world. And it can't do so unless it spends trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives defending freedom and spreading democracy and ensuring that democracy reigns. And they speak in such terms. Whereas the Paleocons detest that kind of rhetoric, and they see it as wasteful, and they see the Paleocons, they want to focus on the shape of American society. They don't want America to become like any other country. And what happens when you have an empire, swanning away a mosquito, when you have an empire, the colonies come in, right? That's what happened to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire ended up being mostly non-Roman, right? So it changes the shape of society. You end up having lots of Mexicans in America, for example, and Paleocons don't like that. They want it to be white and traditional and conservative and Christian. Anyway, Paleocons never really had any power in American history, but that might be changing. Like, they really like Donald Trump because Donald Trump seemed like the anti-war candidate, even though he doesn't cleanly fall into neocon or Paleocon. But anyway, let's start reading the article, and we'll evolve our discussion as we go. So I'm going to skip a little bit of his preamble here and jump into the meaty part, where he starts to ask, are the neocons, so the title of the article is The Neocons, the Generation On. He's doing a kind of retrospective on neoconservatives. And maybe I should mention, the Iraq War was like the big blunder of neocons, which gave people like Trump a way in. Because until then, the idea of America's foreign intervention was very popular. But with the failure of what happened in Iraq, or at least the unpopularity thereafter, the neocons suffered a setback. So he's trying to say, like, are the neocons, are they redeemable? So this is what he says. Are the neocons due a reappraisal? A generation has passed since their reputations crashed in the streets and sands of Iraq. Now, as Ukraine fights for its survival and Syria tries to recover from Bashar al-Assad, some of their ideas are the common sense of the day. That's kind of a radical statement. Such as that cultivating dictators isn't half as clever in the long run as realists suggest. That a cavalier, trigger-happy America might be a bad thing, but a reticent, stay-at-home one is worse. It is hard to argue against both the liberal naivete of pre-2022 Europe and the strongman worship of MAGA without unconsciously parroting a Weekly Standard editorial from yesteryear. The violent export of democracy was the worst hubris of the naughties, worse even than the pre-2008 conceit that central banks had smoothed out the business cycle for good. The least bad case for Trump was that next to the neocons, he was the soul of restraint. But as democracy now counts for almost nothing in America's foreign statecraft, we can see what overcorrection looks like. So what he's trying to say right up until now is that the neocons aren't perfect, but they had the right idea. That you cannot basically be isolationist. You cannot let the dictators of the world rise up. And of course, this is a very American-centric way of viewing the world. even though this guy is not an American, I think he's a British person. But let's continue. Notice that some of the most deranged opponents of Trump within the right are neocons, even if not all answer to the label, as well as Kagan, who quit the Washington Post over its ambivalence at the last election. There is Bill Kristol and David Frum, as was shown when moderates failed to take on woke, leaving it to free speech purists and single-issue feminists. It often takes a committed mind to fight. Zeal has its uses. So, will neoconservatism be rehabilitated? Will its missionary flavor appeal to people who see democracy going undefended the world over? I doubt it. Their wars just went too badly, even if Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, who weren't neo-anything, devised them. As an excuse, the planning was botched, is down there with Brexit wasn't implemented properly. If a grand utopian project depends on superb execution, that is a case against proceeding with it. You might call this insight conservative. Still, without knowing it, lots of us now find ourselves saying things every day that are neoconish. Of all the credulous hooey that was written at the turn of the millennium about the power of digital connectivity to make peace about the smallest of the world, most of it was liberal. In contrast, the neocon theme that violence is permanent and that free societies have to play rough has aged much too well. Had Europe listened, a continent with more people than America and more output than China might not have so little purchase on the world. On a recent trip to Champagne, it took me a while to realize how much of that undulating pleasure zone consists of First World War battlefields. Overcoming a savage past to be the global capital of fun is Europe's miracle, but it isn't a template for external relations, and it took shape under the iron umbrella of NATO. Saying all this now, when the consensus is that Europe must tool up, is almost banal. Saying so at the turn of the millennial took some vision and daring. The neocon legacy is that Americans are from Mars and so are Europeans. You know, on some level, this idea that the world is going to be in conflict, that there's going to be war, that a nation needs to use hard power in order to achieve its interests, this is true. Who can deny that, right? I mean, it's the obvious and true thing. Now let me put the Muslim perspective on this, because what you have to understand about neocons is that neoconservatism has always really been about dealing with the Islamic threat. That's what the war on terror was about. That's why they targeted the Muslim countries. If you actually read neocon literature, they live in fear of a return of the Islamic caliphate. And sometimes it really gets me, because Muslims themselves, we believe in our defeatism that such a thing is impossible, and yet our powerful enemies scheme and think in terms of the inevitable rise of this caliphate. So neocons believe that through these foreign wars and military interventions and diplomatic and economic sanctions and whatnot, that they can keep the Middle East under wraps, that they can keep the Muslim world subservient to them. And the Paleocons disagree with them. And the Paleocons, again, remember, they have America's interests at heart. They're not Muslims. But they believe, and I want to share this article from Patrick Buchanan, who I mentioned was a leading Paleocon. They believe that all of these efforts are fruitless, which again gets me, because with all of the naysaying and the defeatism of the Muslims, you have now this other group of Americans who believe that all the effort of the neocons to suppress Islam and to suppress the rise of a new Islamic civilization is fruitless. It's not going to happen. In fact, if you read Patrick Buchanan's article, An Idea Whose Time Has Come, which, to be honest, is a super inspirational article for any Muslim to read, you'll notice the argument that he makes is that all of America's actions in the Middle East only serve to create new enemies. Sorry, I have to swat away these mosquitoes. Only serve to alienate, to marginalize, or sorry, the best word is to aggravate the Muslims against America. Because Buchanan envisions a world in which an Islamic civilization can exist, does exist, and is not necessarily an enemy of America. Of course, the neocons say, well, no, the Islamic civilization will be an enemy to all, and they're going to threaten our way of life, and we need to be the hegemon, we need to be the superpower. And I, as a Muslim, really sympathize with the Paleocons, because I think we want the same things. The Paleocons want to maintain kind of like a whiteness, a tradition of the Western civilization, and fine, you can keep that. I don't really care about living in the West if I get to have self-determination in the Muslim world. The problem is that the Muslim world does not have self-determination. It is neo-colonized. it is subjugated by American foreign policy and military intervention, and there are these tyrants that are placed over us, and we don't get to have a say. We don't get to choose Islam as our civilization because we're forced into the cubbyhole of these secular nation states. If you stopped that, you don't have to do anything except stop your subjugation and intervention. We would have that self-determination. We wouldn't feel the need to be in the West. We would go back to our countries, build up our own countries. You have your country, we have our country. And yeah, that would be the rest of it. I think, we can reach a kind of mutual agreement with the white man who wants to maintain the whiteness and the tradition of his society in the West. Because really, we Muslims, our focus is the Muslim world. We want to reform that. We want to rebuild our civilization as it once was and resume our own way of life, just as they want to resume their way of life, right? So, but of course the neocons won't have it. Now, where does Trump fall into all this? I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, he's not cleanly one or the other, but definitely he's surrounded by the neocons. And the basic American foreign policy of intervention, hegemonizing, imperializing the world has always been consistent through Democrats and Republicans and Trumps and non-Trumps, and it seems to want to continue. But Tucker Carlson, I always mess up his name, Tucker Carlson, his name is a tongue twister. He seems to be representing a faction of the American deep state which is against some of these foreign wars, which is interesting to see. I don't know exactly where that ball is going, where that ball is going to roll, but we'll keep an eye out, all right? I'm going to send that article and maybe I'll do a review of it one day, but it's good to see you guys. Assalamu alaikum.